Have you ever wondered why you feel drained, even when nothing dramatic has happened? There is a kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep, no matter how many hours you get. It's a quiet erosion, a slow unraveling of your sense of peace. It doesn't arrive like a storm, it creeps in like a shadow. And the most unsettling part is that you probably didn't even notice when it started. Carl Jung once said that what you do not confront remains inside and shapes your life. But when what you're not confronting is made to look normal, what then? This exhaustion doesn't wear a warning label. It hides in your daily interactions, in the small moments when you laugh off a cruel joke, stay silent during a subtle insult, or justify someone else's selfish behavior. One day, it's a small compromise. Next, it's a pattern. You begin to adjust, to excuse, to swallow. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop recognizing yourself. What you once called being easygoing was actually the fear of conflict. What you used to brush off as just being tired was the emotional weight of constantly walking on eggshells. You've been told to be kind, understanding, and selfless, but no one taught you where kindness ends and self-erasure begins. Jung understood this decay. He compared it to psychological termites, small, silent, destructive. They don't break down your house all at once. They nibble at the foundation until it collapses quietly under your feet. That's how toxic patterns work. They disguise themselves as love, as loyalty, as responsibility, and the longer you tolerate them, the deeper they dig into your identity. If you're feeling a dull ache that you can't quite name, this may be it. Not burnout from doing too much, but from swallowing too much. Not fatigue from effort, but from emotional self-betrayal. This isn't just about feeling tired, it's about waking up to the truth that your tiredness may be a sign, not of weakness, but of wisdom. Something inside you is stirring. It's the part that still remembers how it feels to be free. Are you ready to listen? Have you ever been comforted by someone's words, only to walk away feeling strangely smaller, more unsure of yourself? That is the cunning shape of control when it wears the mask of care. It sounds like love. It feels like protection. But underneath its softness lies a slow erosion of your intuition. I'm only saying this because I care. You're too emotional to make decisions right now. If you really loved me, you'd do this for me. These phrases are not always shouted. They are whispered, threaded into concern, and wrapped in obligation. What they truly say is this: you cannot be trusted with your own life. This kind of manipulation is not always intentional, but it is always dangerous. It teaches you to second-guess yourself, to hesitate before you speak, to weigh someone else's emotional response before expressing your truth. Over time, your inner voice is no longer your guide. It becomes background noise behind the louder demands of guilt, obligation, and emotional debt. Consider the adult who hears their partner say, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" You tend to get overwhelmed easily. Or the parent who questions every step forward with a concerned tone. "I just don't want to see you get hurt again." At first it sounds like care, but over time your confidence withers. You find yourself needing their approval before making even small decisions. You stop trusting your instincts because they've been gently invalidated for years. Carl Jung described this phenomenon as a psychic entanglement, a dynamic where your growth is subtly controlled through the withholding or distortion of affirmation. What seems like love becomes a system of emotional dependency. You comply not because you are weak, but because you are afraid of being wrong. You confuse their concern with your own clarity. Eventually, your boundaries blur. You stop recognizing what is yours and what is theirs. Their discomfort becomes your responsibility. Their emotions become your compass. You shrink yourself, not because they ask you to, but because you've been conditioned to believe that peace means silence and love means surrender. Healing begins with recognition. It is seeing through the costume. It is whispering to yourself, just because they said it with a soft voice does not mean it wasn't controlled. It is asking the hard question, who am I when I'm not trying to manage how someone else feels about my choices? In real life, it looks like drawing one small boundary and watching who resists it. It means listening to your gut before you ask for permission. It means honoring your yes and your no without explanation, not as rebellion, but as return. So ask yourself now, whose care has become your cage? What disguised concern have you mistaken for a connection? And what would it feel like to stand in your truth, even if no one affirms it? Because the moment you stop confusing guilt with guidance is the moment you begin to belong to yourself again. Have you ever laughed at a joke about yourself, not because it was funny, but because you felt like you had to? Mockery disguised as humor is one of the most overlooked forms of emotional degradation. It slips past defenses under the veil of playfulness. No confrontation, no open attack, just a carefully placed joke that makes you the punchline. If you react, you're too sensitive. If you stay silent, it continues. Either way, your worth is slowly carved into something smaller, something easier to manage in the eyes of others. It begins in familiar places. At a dinner table, when someone comments, "Oh, you know how clumsy she is," and everyone laughs. Or at work, when a colleague says, "Don't ask him, he'll just overthink it like always." People chuckle. You force a smile. But inside, something contracts. What they call teasing feels like a quiet betrayal. And because everyone laughs, you question your own reaction. Was it really that bad? Did I imagine the sting? Carl Jung warned of the power of the unconscious to shape identity, especially when patterns repeat. Mockery, when disguised as humor and left unchecked, plants seeds in the unconscious. You start to believe the roles assigned to you, the clumsy one, the emotional one, the weak one. And over time, these roles become self-fulfilling. You censor your expression to avoid ridicule. You dull your light to avoid being noticed. You laugh along to stay safe. But this isn't just about jokes, it's about emotional hierarchy. Symbolically, the mocker positions themselves above. Their laughter signals power. Your silence signals surrender. The group accepts it. The roles are reinforced. And your self-worth shrinks beneath the weight of unspoken shame. In real life, the cost is profound. People stop sharing their ideas because they fear being mocked. Children stop showing creativity because they were teased for it. Adults stop being vulnerable in relationships because every soft truth was once turned into a weapon. This isn't harmless. It is internal erosion. Healing begins with the courage to name it, to say, "That wasn't funny to me," to stop laughing when the joke is at your expense, to walk away when your dignity is the price of someone else's entertainment. Jung believed the psyche regains strength when we stop splitting off parts of ourselves to appease others. Your sensitivity is not a flaw, it is feedback. It is your soul whispering, "This isn't safe." So ask yourself, whose laughter have you mistaken for love? What role have you accepted in silence just to stay included? And are you ready to reclaim your voice, even if it means being called too serious or no fun? Because the truth is, your joy does not need to be built on self-betrayal. And you were not put here to be the easy target in someone else's spotlight. You were meant to be whole, and humor that wounds is never worth the applause. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused? Not because you forgot what happened, but because someone made you question your memory? This is how gaslighting begins. Not with rage, but with subtle distortion. It sounds like, "That never happened." You're imagining things. You always make everything a big deal. And slowly, the ground beneath you begins to shift. What you were certain of yesterday becomes blurry today. You start editing yourself, not just to be heard, but to be safe. The danger isn't that they lied. The danger is that you begin to believe them. It's in the everyday moments. You bring up a painful comment from a partner, and they smile. "You're too sensitive. I was joking." You recall a boundary being crossed, and they say, "You never said that. Don't twist things." And the most painful part? You begin to defend them to yourself. You rationalize. You doubt your tone. You wonder if you're exaggerating. That's not sensitivity. That's survival, trying to keep you attached to someone who's quietly stealing your reality. Carl Jung warned that what we fail to confront becomes a controlling force in the unconscious. Gaslighting is one of the most disorienting forms of psychological control because it attacks the foundation of your truth. Once your perception is hijacked, your boundaries become negotiable, your sense of identity becomes fluid, and your voice, once firm and clear, turns into a whisper you barely trust. This is inner betrayal. You are no longer just dealing with someone else's denial. You begin to deny yourself, and when that happens, you become trapped, not by the other person, but by the doubt now living in your own nervous system. You stop asking questions. You stop naming what hurts. You live inside a fog where everything feels off, but nothing is obvious. In real life, this often looks like long periods of numbness or confusion. You can't explain what's wrong, but you know something isn't right. You become anxious in calm environments. You apologize before you speak. You feel guilty for having feelings. These are not overreactions. They are emotional residue left behind by repeated dismissal. Healing begins with one powerful decision: to believe in yourself again. Not because you have proof, not because someone else agrees, but because your intuition has been speaking this whole time, and now you are ready to listen. So ask yourself, when did you first begin to question your own memory? Whose comfort required you to rewrite your truth? And what would it feel like to say, "I remember, that did happen, and I won't pretend otherwise"? Because once you return to your reality, your clarity becomes your boundary, and no one can rewrite what you refuse to forget. Have you ever caught yourself apologizing for how you feel before you even finish expressing it? This quiet reflex, so familiar to many in midlife, often comes from years of emotional invalidation. You were not told outright to silence your emotions. You were shown. You were shown it when your disappointment was met with a sigh, your tears with rolled eyes, your anger with labels like overreacting or dramatic. Slowly, you learned not to trust your internal world. You became fluent in emotional editing, saying less, softening your tone, deleting truth in real time. This isn't a weakness. This is conditioning. Perhaps you grew up in a household where emotions were seen as a burden. Perhaps you were taught that crying made things worse, or that showing sadness made you vulnerable to mockery. So you became the one who smiled while hurting, the one who held it together when others fell apart, the one who took pride in how little you needed. But there's a cost to carrying what was never expressed. Carl Jung warned that what is not made conscious will manifest as fate. And emotional suppression, left unacknowledged, will leak into every corner of your life. The consequences can be subtle. You wake up heavy without knowing why. You overreact to small things and feel shame for the outburst. You keep your relationships emotionally shallow because you've internalized the belief that your depth is too much. But this is not your truth. This is the result of repeatedly being told, directly or indirectly, that your feelings were inconvenient. The tragedy is that many adults no longer even know how they feel. Ask them, and they'll tell you what they think, or what others need. But to pause and check in, what am I actually feeling right now, feels foreign. The emotional body has gone quiet, not because the feelings are gone, but because they were never welcomed. Healing begins with a radical reframe. Your feelings are not the problem. The problem was a world that taught you to silence them. Emotions are not flaws to fix. They are signals, and when you begin to name them, guilt, grief, anger, shame, joy, you begin to restore the compass you lost. In real life, this might look like journaling what you feel before justifying it. It might be saying, "I feel hurt," without following it with, "but it's not a big deal." It might be telling someone, "Please don't minimize what I just said." These acts may feel uncomfortable at first. That's okay. Unlearning emotional self-abandonment is a process. So ask yourself now, when did you first decide that silence was safer than expression? Who taught you that your feelings had to shrink to fit the room? And what might open up if you stopped editing your emotional truth? Because your feelings are not too much. They are not messy. They are not wrong. They are yours. And reclaiming them is not only healing, it is how you remember who you are. What happens to your sense of self when the loudest cruelty is delivered without a single word? There's a form of emotional abuse that leaves no visible scars, no shouting, no name-calling, just a hollow space where connection once lived. It's not conflict, it's absence, the punishment of silence, the strategic ignoring of your presence as if you no longer exist. And perhaps the most painful part is that there's no clear incident to explain it, nothing you can point to. Just an invisible withdrawal that makes you feel like your very existence has become offensive. This is not simply someone needing space. This is intentional erasure. It often starts subtly. A cold shoulder, delayed replies, disinterest in your voice. At first you rationalize it. They're tired, they're overwhelmed, I'm probably overthinking. But the silence lingers. You bring something up, and it's met with a blank stare. You try again, only to be dismissed with a shrug, or worse, complete indifference. The message is clear. Your needs don't matter. Your emotions are inconvenient. Your presence is conditional. Carl Jung understood that contempt is one of the most destructive forces in relationships because it attacks your core worth without confrontation. Unlike anger, which still engages, contempt disengages. It doesn't fight. It retreats into a fortress of superiority, and when silence becomes a pattern, you stop reaching out. You stop asking for what you need. You silence yourself before they get the chance to do it again. In this kind of environment, emotional detachment becomes a survival strategy. You pull back not because you want to, but because being ignored hurts more than being alone. You begin to doubt your voice, your value, your role in the relationship. You feel invisible, but more than that, you feel punished for wanting to be seen. This dynamic is often applauded in toxic cultures. It's framed as keeping your cool, not rewarding drama or giving people time. But when silence is used to dominate, dismiss, or degrade, it is not regulation. It is control. It is the kind of emotional warfare that causes the other person to question their own worth without ever uttering a cruel word. Healing from this requires something powerful: reclaiming your visibility. Not from them, but from within. It means refusing to measure your importance by someone else's attention. It means realizing that their silence is not a reflection of your value, but a reflection of their emotional immaturity. So ask yourself, when did you start shrinking so someone else wouldn't withdraw from you? Who taught you that love meant enduring emotional exile? And what would happen if you stopped trying to be good enough for someone who weaponizes silence? Because love should never feel like erasure. And your voice was not meant to echo in someone else's indifference. It was meant to be heard, especially by you. Have you ever been praised for how much you give, yet quietly wondered why you feel so empty? There is a kind of suffering that hides behind the mask of being a good person. It does not look like pain on the outside. In fact, it's often celebrated. You are the one who always shows up, always gives, always adjusts. You are the reliable friend, the selfless partner, the tireless caregiver. And yet, beneath all that admiration, something begins to disappear. You. This is not kindness. It is self-abandonment dressed in virtue. It begins with small compromises. You let someone else choose the restaurant. You cancel your plans to accommodate theirs. You bite your tongue, again, because speaking up might cause tension. Over time, it becomes a pattern. You keep the peace at the cost of your own truth. You suppress your desires so that others don't feel uncomfortable. You stop expecting anything in return because being needed starts to feel like enough. Carl Jung warned that the false self, what he called the persona, forms when we begin to live through the roles we think others want us to play: the caregiver, the peacekeeper, the dependable one. These roles are seductive because they bring affirmation, but the danger lies in becoming trapped within them. When your identity is built entirely on meeting the needs of others, your inner voice begins to fade. You lose touch with what you want, what you feel, and who you are beyond service. The tragedy is that culture often glorifies this erasure. We are taught that putting others first is noble, that self-sacrifice is the highest form of love. But Jung would call this an imbalance of the psyche, because love without boundaries becomes an obligation, and goodness without a self becomes a performance. Real love does not ask you to disappear. In real life, this might look like the mother who gives everything to her family and forgets what it feels like to be a woman with dreams of her own. Or the partner who says yes to everything out of fear that saying no will make them less lovable. These stories are everywhere, but they are rarely called what they are: quiet forms of self-erasure. Healing begins when you stop measuring your worth by how little you need, when you stop striving to be easy, low maintenance, and endlessly available. When you say, "I matter too," and mean it. That is not selfishness. That is self-respect. So ask yourself, when did you begin to equate love with vanishing? Who benefits from your silence, your exhaustion, your constant flexibility? And what would it feel like to be good without giving yourself away? Because love that costs you your identity is not love. It is fear disguised as virtue. And the world does not need more selfless ghosts. It needs people who can love without losing themselves. It needs you, whole, visible, and unafraid to take up space. Have you ever stayed in a place where you were barely tolerated just because leaving felt like losing everything? Many people do not realize that the deepest betrayal is often not what someone else does to you. It's what you learn to do to yourself just to survive. You swallow your truth, make yourself smaller, and convince yourself that crumbs are a feast. You begin to justify disrespect because at least it means you're not alone. And soon, the version of you that once dreamed, spoke freely, or laughed without fear becomes a ghost wandering someone else's life. This is not love. This is survival dressed as loyalty. Carl Jung called this a psychic death, a slow erasure of your essence in exchange for conditional belonging. You don't rage, you don't resist, you just adapt. You over-apologize. You become agreeable to avoid being abandoned. In trying to hold on to others, you let go of yourself. And in that quiet sacrifice, something inside collapses. Consider this. Have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized who you've become? Not because you've aged, but because you've abandoned the inner child that once dared to hope? When contempt becomes the price of staying in a relationship, a job, or a family dynamic, you are not belonging. You are bargaining your soul for a seat at a collapsing table. Real life proves this every day. A woman stays in a marriage where she's mocked just to keep the family together. A man lets his boss humiliate him daily because the job pays well and he has mouths to feed. A daughter remains silent as her parents shame her choices because speaking up might mean being cut off. They wear masks for so long they forget what their real face feels like. Jung teaches that belonging that demands your silence is not connection, it is exile. You are not truly loved when you must disappear to be accepted. When your truth threatens your place in someone's life, it is not your truth that is wrong. It is the conditions placed on your existence. So ask yourself, what have you been calling love that is actually fear? What have you accepted as normal that is quietly destroying your spirit? And most importantly, what version of you had to die so you could be allowed to stay? This is not about blame. It's about awakening. Healing begins the moment you decide that your existence no longer needs permission, that you are not born to beg for worthiness, but to remember it, to belong to yourself so fiercely that no external rejection can make you forget your value. You don't need to be liked to be free. You need to be whole. And sometimes, wholeness begins with walking away from anything that only accepts you when you're edited. You were never meant to spend your life explaining your truth to people committed to misunderstanding it. At some point, the constant explaining, shrinking, and waiting becomes more painful than the fear of being alone. That moment is your awakening. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, almost sacred, like the first deep breath after years of holding it in. You realize that nothing, not approval, not familiarity, not even love, is worth daily self-abandonment. The cost is too high. And the return? A version of you that is constantly eroding beneath someone else's comfort. Carl Jung once said that your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. That's what happens here. The fog lifts, and what you see isn't a dramatic reinvention. It's the version of you that existed before the masks, the performances, and the invisible contracts you signed in exchange for belonging. The version of you that knows rest isn't laziness, silence isn't weakness, and walking away isn't failure. It is the birth of integrity. To rebuild yourself, you do not need a grand plan. You need one honest act, one true word, one clean boundary that says, "This is where I end and you begin." That is the line where self-respect returns, and once you draw that line, something alchemical happens. The people who stayed for your performance will leave, but the ones who come for your truth will arrive without noise, without demand, without distortion. This is not about becoming someone new, it's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to hide. So begin again. Begin not with perfection, but with presence. Begin with a cup of coffee alone without guilt. Begin with a no you don't explain. Begin with a yes that feels like alignment, not obligation. Because what you own, your voice, your time, your peace, cannot own you. It cannot manipulate you, confuse you, or abandon you. It becomes yours again. And from that place, you live differently. You move through rooms without performing. You let silence speak for you. You no longer beg for a seat at tables you've outgrown. In the end, the only thing you ever had to do was stop betraying yourself for comfort that was never real. Begin again, not for applause, not for validation, but because you finally remember who you are when no one is watching, and that is the most unforgettable version of you. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.